Welcome to the 2012 Fall Webinar Series, sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture's People's Garden Initiative. For the next hour, you'll learn all about school gardening. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our technical facilitator, Jerry Schneider, and the rest of our virtual hosts at Kansas State University. I'm Annie Cicerini with USDA's People's Garden Initiative. Today's instructor is Liz Falk, the Professional Development Educator for Cornell's Garden-Based Learning Program. Liz leads professional development workshops to educators around New York State who want to incorporate garden-based learning into their programs or create a new garden-based learning program. She joins us from Ithaca, New York. Liz has a background in sustainable food systems that began with experiences here in Washington, D.C., where she works to improve food security and fresh food access for D.C. residents. In 2007, she co-founded and directed Common Good City Farm. Participants can ask Liz questions via Twitter using hashtag AskPGI. I will be asking these questions at the end of the session. The title of today's presentation is Best Practices in Starting and Sustaining a School Garden. Liz, the virtual floor is all yours.
All right, hello. Thanks so much for hosting today. It's a pleasure to be here. I am new to these webinar things, so I'll just tell you all that. So my hope is that there's a little interaction actually here, or at least you're involved in a little side thinking as we go through this presentation today. And as Annie said, feel free to post things to the Twitter account that she'll relay to me at the end of the talk. So we're going to start off today so I figured I would throw out a picture of myself so you know a little bit about who's talking, or at least you can visualize what I look like. I certainly love in-person presentations, so this is as good as I could get, I figured. We're going to be talking today about starting and maintaining a school garden. It will definitely not be everything you need to know to run a school garden. It's going to be, in my hope, a great intro to it. I hope to provide you with resources so that you can know where to start after this presentation, and also you'll have my contact information if you need it. It's there on the screen at the bottom, our website for Cornell Garden-Based Learning, and my email address. So I'm going to jump right in here. What we're going to do today is discuss a little bit about, before we can start a school garden, we should discuss a little bit about why it's even important. Why are we going to garden with youth? We'll go through that pretty quickly. I have a feeling most of us have a general idea of why it's important. Then we'll discuss some specifics to starting a school garden, some basic things that I think are really important to keep in mind. And though the title of the talk is starting and maintaining a school garden, I actually think that we actually don't just want to maintain school gardens. We want to create school gardens that thrive. To create this kind of environment, I'll be sharing a tool with you, which you might already have, called a logic model that we use a lot here in the work that I do with Cornell Garden-Based Learning. And it's an amazing tool, complicated at first perhaps, but really easy to use. And then we'll go over some resources for you to take home with you. So before we start, you perhaps got an email or saw on the Twitter feed that it would be most helpful if you have the ability to print this logic model. If you haven't already, you can go ahead and print it now from this URL on the screen. It can print on 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17 if you have that capability. This will allow you to do a little hands-on work while we go through the presentation today, and actually be able to walk away with something useful that you can continue to use and potentially share with others. So hopefully you have or are in the process of getting that logic model to have with you on your desk. The other thing I just want to bring to your attention today is a couple times throughout the presentation you'll see this red text that says pause for thought. My hope is that you'll actually take some time to answer the question on the screen to yourself or with anyone else watching, or be working on the logic model that's on your desk. So you'll be able to actually fill in some boxes there and get some things done. So you'll see that pause for thought a couple times throughout the presentation. This is what that logic model looks like if you're just curious, if you haven't printed it. Again, maybe it looks confusing if you're new to them, but it's quite easy and a really great useful tool. The logic model, just to talk to you a little bit about them if they're new, it's a living document. It's not the kind of document that you'll fill out all these boxes, file it away in the computer, or print it off and put it in a folder, and then it will be done. It's a very much a living document, one that I put on the wall in my office, and I'm constantly adding sticky notes to and changing things, and it really allows for your program, whether in this situation it's going to be your school garden, to continuously grow, continuously adapt to what's happening and the responses that you're getting from people, from students, from other teachers perhaps, maybe from the plants, and really realize where you're at in this whole scheme of starting to quote-unquote finishing, and then how can you even go beyond where you thought you might want to be with your garden, how you can go farther. So it's a living document that really allows you to create a school garden that's not just there and used sometimes, but that it can fully thrive and cultivate community as well beyond the school itself. So just starting at the basics here, why does gardening with youth even matter? I'm sure a couple of things come to mind. And it's important that we are able to answer this question quantitatively and qualitatively. If you don't have a garden yet at your school, or you're wanting something bigger, more elaborate, it's important to be able to answer some specific questions, especially to the administration, to people who are going to need to give you permission to do what you want to do with this garden. So it's important to have some facts and also some just general things that you know from your experiences with gardening with youth and gardening in general. I'm going to give you a brief rundown of some of the research that we've done here at Cornell about why it matters. So gardening is a way of youth engagement. We can involve youth in responsible, challenging action through gardening. It's not simply giving people some seeds, giving some youth some seeds and telling them to plant it, but they actually can get fully involved in the entire planning process of the garden all the way to the harvesting and beyond. Gardens can allow us to enhance our storytelling ability. They allow for written and artistic expression. Reading and comprehension have been shown to increase dramatically from children who have been working in gardening. Overall ability to pay attention and to sit still after they've gardened has been really important. And it's a really nice environment to create this mutuality between the youth, between the teachers and adults and other people working in the garden, really creating a nice synergistic relationship between everybody involved. It's a very, very unique opportunity, something that, that really encourages positive youth development, which I'll talk a little bit about. In Cornell Garden-Based Learning, we have these 4 things of thinking about positive youth development, these 4 kind of phrases, and one of them there just appeared on the screen called I belong. Having youth engage in gardens really allow a student to feel like they belong. They feel like they fit in, they find a place, they find something that's their favorite to do in the garden, and they become familiar with other kids who want to do it. They learn crops, they're able to identify them. Sometimes belonging is growing food that might be from a specific student's home country, which otherwise they might not see around. So really valuing diversity and offering opportunities for children and youth to be working in a garden also gives them the opportunity to learn in different styles, whether it's reading and then planting, or learning hands-on by maybe even making mistakes or growing a tomato to fruition. All those opportunities really allow for a young person to feel like they fit in, they belong, which is really important, of course, with our young people. Children who garden, of course, this is a lot of reasons why many of us want school gardens. We want our children and we want youth to eat better. We know obesity is a big problem. We know food security is a big challenge in many areas of the country. Children who garden have been shown to have improved nutrition and health awareness. They have positive attitudes towards trying new things. Once somebody plants it, they're generally likely to at least try it, if not eat the whole meal. Really important impact from gardening. Children who garden have an ability to concentrate and take tests after periods of time spent outdoors. You probably realize this yourself. It's not just children that have this ability to concentrate and to focus, but after you go outside, whether it's gardening or going for a walk or a run, you feel like you can focus more. It allows directly for higher learning achievements and higher test scores with our youth. They feel like they can. There's that second slogan that we use here at Cornell Garden-Based Learning, I can. And feeling like you can actually achieve specific things is extremely important. They become leaders. They're able to lead other students and really show some confidence. This might play out with a garden project in terms of fundraising, fundraising ideas that raise money or tools and other things you need for a garden. They can test soil, they can map the garden, they can design the garden. There's so many things that we don't always let youth do that they are fully capable of doing. Children who garden have shown an increased environmental awareness. Very, very important. Something so great for everybody to start having. If we start connecting children in gardening, and even more so just with nature, they start feeling responsibility towards other people in their community, towards our planet. Stewardship and ownership of the garden and beyond is, of course, extremely important. This is what we kind of phrase as generosity. So it's not only with environmental and nature awareness, but also how can the garden be generous? How can we share the harvest, perhaps? Are there other people that the harvest should go to who need the harvest in the community? There's the Grow a Row program that is pretty popular around community gardens and school gardens. Just really figuring out how the garden can be more than just something that serves the school and serves the people at the school. Really creating community impact. Children who garden have the opportunity for planning and decision-making that actually affects things. This is really important. For a lot of adults, it's very hard to step back from a garden and to say, go ahead, plant things, and give the children the ability and the resources to learn how to plant something and maybe make mistakes or maybe do it right the first time, but they definitely learn that by being involved in it, by being part of the planning process and the decision-making process. They are engaged in their community. Their parents actually start getting more engaged in their school activities and school experience. Of course, that's quite impactful, and taking the garden knowledge home to their parents often happens as well. And just having that feeling like they matter. They actually create self-esteem by realizing that they planted a seed and were able to grow it all the way to harvest and then even share it with a community member. So it's important to remember that us as adults, we have to step back, make sure we don't do all of the work. Really let the children experience, just like we did when we first started gardening. Interaction with nature through gardening and beyond, of course, is really good for us and our health. It enhances our mental health. Like I said already, reduces stress, which directly lowers blood pressure and relieves muscle tension. So starting young with these things, of course, is important. Just like eating well when we're young is important for our health later. Doing gardening and being active and physical is so important at any age. So just worth mentioning that as well. So just a little recap here. Gardening in schools can increase specific science achievement scores and other test scores as well, increases parent involvement, provides hands-on experience that value diverse learning styles so people really feel like they can belong, they fit in. Some student that maybe doesn't do so well in some classroom work will often thrive in a garden experience. And that enhancing storytelling is so important to maintain cultures that and information that's passed down from generation and generation. The garden really has the ability to do that, just like food does when you sit at a table with multiple generations and a recipe's been passed down. The garden does the same exact thing. It's pretty magical. So here's our first pause for thought. My hope was that you'd be able to post the number to this question in the chat box, but I realize that's not possible for the webinar, so I'm sorry about that. But just take a moment here to think about which of the scenarios below would be something that we would consider positive youth development when planting kale in a garden. So you can take a moment to read those. I'll read through them. The first one, showing you specifically how much space the kale plant needs to grow. Number 2 would be to encourage the youth to research kale and all of its growing requirements, and also maybe find another crop that they should try. The third one would be to plant care for youth and have them provide all the water and all the care, but that you actually do the planting for them. 4 would be youth don't like kale. We shouldn't plant any at all. 5 would be to let youth plant the kale with maybe incorrect spacing, even though we might not get quite as much harvest. Or 6 would be to plant and grow the kale on your own as the teacher, as the volunteer, and then share the harvest later. So just give that a thought for a moment. Think about what strategy maybe you would do in your school garden and which one might be the one that really exhibits something that would be positive youth experience for your students. And just walking through them quickly. Of course, letting youth plant kale with incorrect spacing and risking decrease in harvest is one of the answers here. Making those mistakes, as I've mentioned before, is so important. And I see a lot of times adults really get stuck on wanting to tell the students how far things, especially tomato plants, which are so small when we transplant them into the ground. And we know that they need a lot more space, but that experience of the student realizing that later is so valuable. The first one to show you specifically how much space the plant needs to grow, there is value in that, of course, in teaching, but better yet would be to give the student a seed packet if they're the right age, let them read how much space kale needs, and then give them a ruler or a tape measure and have them actually measure it out if you're definitely worrying about how much harvest and you want it planted at the correct space, which is totally legitimate, but still giving them the tools so that they actually learn it. Number 2, also really giving them the opportunity to choose another crop they would try is excellent, and be sure you do that. They may not like kale now, but maybe they'll try it after, and also see what they say as far as what they want to grow. Oftentimes they'll tell you they want to grow pizza, so there's a great learning opportunity to tell them what's actually involved in pizza and what can you grow. Definitely number 4 is not positive youth development whatsoever. Number 3 is too much doing for them and not giving them any capacity to take on that work by themselves, and as well, same as number 6. So hopefully you have the right answer there, and that gives you a little sense about what we're going for with our positive youth development with gardens. So most importantly, it's got to be fun. Should be exciting and stimulating, which it will be, especially as they have more and more ability to make decisions themselves, but always remember to have fun. Rules are important in the garden. As you start a garden, definitely lay the foundation of what kind of rules you want to set. Maybe they don't have to have their inside voices because they're out in the garden. That's kind of exciting for kids and special, but they still have to be safe. They still have to listen to the teacher, do things in pairs, all those rules that you might have when you go on a field trip. Some of those are pretty similar that you'd have in the garden. Tool use is something we're not going to get into today, but certainly if you have an age group that is starting to use garden tools or things like knives when you harvest and make a meal, making sure people that they really know how to use it and understand the rules there. But always have fun. All right, so now that we have a little understanding of why youth gardening is important, we're going to dive into a little bit about how to get started. First off, I just have to say that remember that you can. I'm not sure if some of you probably already have gardens that have been well established, and some of you might be looking to start one for the first time. And just always remember that you can. Almost always, no matter what the challenge is that's in front of you, you can figure it out. It's easy to get discouraged, but resources are out there. There's places people to ask for help, both locally in your town and, of course, across the country. Others have done this before. Yes, you are very special, of course, but you're not reinventing the wheel, and that's a great thing. Luckily, a lot of people have come before us and have been doing this for a really long time and have paved the way for a lot of garden projects doing really well and being more and more able to have even bigger spaces at schools and really being seen as a great priority for schools. And just remember that a little goes a long way. So you'll certainly want to feel like you want to do it all year 1 or year 2, and just starting small and starting with a tiny bit is even better, just as good as doing it all, but usually even better so that you don't overwhelm yourself. So the next thing that you'd want to do before you get started and full on diving into your garden is to think about where the idea comes from. Why is this even coming to your mind? What is the need, the issue, or the situation that this garden is actually going to address? Is it just because it's pretty? Is it because the youth are bored, your students are bored, and you want them something to do? Is it because people are hungry? Is there a food security issue? Do you want the students to be harvesting and trying fresh foods? There's all sorts of answers that will start coming to your head as you say, what is the need and why is this idea coming to my mind? Is it that you want an intergenerational experience? You want a way to connect youth with older people, and maybe there's a group of older people, whether it's master gardeners or a residential center or anything else like that around that are willing to help with the garden, and there's great relationships that are there to be had. That's also a great reason. Maybe you just know it's good for the planet and want to address some of our challenges that we have with climate change or with various other things that I don't want to get into here, but that it's specifically good for the planet, which of course it is. So none of these are necessarily, right or wrong, but what's important is that they're yours, that you really take some time to answer the question, why is this garden idea coming to mind? What is the need or the situation to address? Before I have you take a couple minutes to look at your logic model, which maybe some of you are already even checking it out, there's this thought that we want to do before we dive into the need, and I'm sorry if this is hard to read here. It says doing to, doing for, or doing with. And these are three approaches that we can take to a school garden project, or to any project, really, for example. Doing to would be something like a group or a person thinks that a garden is needed in an area, at a school, in a neighborhood, and they plant it and maintain it. They're not necessarily community members or people from the school. This is kind of a top-down approach, and they are doing the garden project for the community. The doing for is kind of similar, but maybe they see that there's a need. Maybe they're just not like, I want a garden here and it must be needed, but they actually see that there's no grocery store and there is a need, and they come into that school or into that community and go ahead and plant the garden and do the work. Without a broad base of involvement from your community, whether that's your school community, your neighborhood, your larger city community, without them involved, these projects will fail. They will not work. It was kind of like an uphill battle. So what we really want to promote as you start thinking about what is the need that you're addressing, why is this project important, is knowing how to do it with the people that you're hoping this garden will actually be part of their life. Perhaps that's you anyway, if you're a teacher in the school. But what is it if you are a teacher, what is it that the children need from this garden, and how can you make it a project that really happens with the children? So that's really the best approach to making these projects work. So thinking about that for a moment, doing to, doing for, and doing with, and then you'll be able to apply this kind of thought and approach to your logic model. If you've got your logic model there in front of you, which hopefully you do, if not, you can certainly follow along on the screen. I'll show you where this is available online later, but this is an opportunity for you to start writing. That first column there is needs, issues, situation. The little words in the boxes of the logic model are simply there as guides. You don't need to follow them. They're just so that you don't have a blank box. They're there to help you get started if you need it. If they don't work for you, you're welcome to cross them out or change them. But here we are in the first column thinking about needs and issues and the situation that this garden project that you've decided you want to do, or you already even have, what is it addressing? So I'll go ahead and give you just about a minute or two to write some things down, and I will be mostly silent for that time, so don't feel like you lost me at all. But take some time. I hope you're able to just write some things down and get some ideas on paper about why this garden is important. What is the need? What's the situation this garden is going to address? Or what is the issue? Okay, so hopefully that wasn't, it was quick. That's not intended for you to fully finish this, but maybe you jotted some ideas down and hopefully got a little start. Before I move on too much further with the logic model, I do want to mention one more thing. If you, again, if you haven't seen these before, you might feel like the whole thing is daunting. What I typically do with logic models is start with what I know. And so if you have a project already, you'll start being able to fill in some of the bubbles on here pretty quickly. Even if you don't, but you have a pretty good idea of what kind of garden project you want to be starting, you'll start being able to fill these things in. That's always a nice way to start, I find, and it takes some of the intimidation factor away. And then I go back and I try to systematically fill it in. So for the sake of today and being a little organized with the presentation, we are going to start from the left and move to the end. The other thing sometimes I do if I fill in what I know, sometimes I will start from the outside, start with the needs and some of the short-term outcomes or the long-term outcomes, which often people know as well. But there's no right or wrong here, but again, just wanted to mention that today we are going to be moving from left to right here. But if you find a way that works better for you, you're welcome to use it once you're out there on your own. So ideas or issues, needs, situations, we're going to move on from there and just talk a little bit more about them before we go into the next column. When you think about what you may have thought, oh gosh, I want to address climate change and I want to address food security and I want to grow food so that the entire class or the entire school can eat it. I want to sell produce and raise money for this community project. You may have thought of tons of needs or issues that you want to address with the garden. Maybe you thought of simply one. What I want to do is encourage you to think about starting small. And in a design methodology that I use a lot called permaculture, we think of principles to memorize things that are generally big and complicated. And so one of the principles to remember this, to start small, is simply small and slow solutions. Kind of thinking about a snail that is both small and it's slow and it carries its home on its back and can easily defend itself. It's sort of like the proverb that the bigger it is, the harder it falls. And that happens. And so sometimes you're really enticed to meet every single need that you can possibly think of, or people start asking you for things with this garden, and you want to do it all. And you just can't. You definitely can't in year 1 or year 2, and maybe eventually you will. Hopefully you will. But if we don't start small, it just won't work. I promise you'll get overwhelmed. Many of you have probably been there already, as have I. So keeping it in mind, this is a really simple garden that was at a school around here, and this was all they had. It's small, and it's a pizza garden, and they made it in that shape as a pizza, and the youth got to kind of choose what they wanted to grow for their pizza, of course, with accompanying lessons about what is needed to make sauce and all those sorts of things. But it really allowed for youth to be involved, and it was nice and simple and really easy to kind of wrap everyone's head around. So the principle there, small and slow solutions. The next thing we're going to talk about is almost moving on to column 2, will be the inputs and the resources that you have to start this garden. And it's a great idea, you already got it, but kind of what do you have then? Where are you starting from? Are you starting from 0 with nothing? And probably you're not. So taking stock of all you have already, and usually it's going to be a whole lot more than you think it's going to be. But I encourage you to speak to people, actually face-to-face, in the school, in the community around the school, whoever you can, talk to people. Start getting some information from them about if they want a garden, what would they like to see there? Are there other ideas besides the garden? Make sure you visit the site that you hope the garden's going to be at if you have one. Maybe you don't have a site, but you have a roof or a alley or something where there can be some container gardens. But by spending time at the site, you start to observe it in rain and sun, observe it on the weekdays, on the weekends, kind of notice who's around. Are they people who maybe want to be involved and volunteer with the garden or take part in any of the garden's programs? You can start creating an inventory, taking notes, writing things down as you observe. A good chunk of the reason of why you need to observe your site is to know where the sun shines. Where does it shine in the morning? What's south? What's north? What's east? What's west? Where does the wind come from? Things like that. Once you've done all this, you got to do it again. And so we do this constantly, just constantly taking stock of what you have. Some of this might also be taking stock of the people that you know that want to be involved in this project. Taking stock of the kind of skills that some of those people offer. Maybe you have a carpenter in the mix. Maybe you have a master gardener in the mix. Maybe you have an artist in the mix. All sorts of kinds of things that people can offer to help. Knowing how much money you have to start, if you have any, how much time do you have, do people have, do the students have to take part in this garden, just really taking stock of it all. And you'll start to realize that you have quite a long list of these things, or hopefully you do, and that usually you're having more than you realize. By taking stock, you're also able to figure out what you do need, of course, where the holes are. So we'll go ahead and pause for thought again, working with the logic model. There's the second column there, which is inputs, or as I've called it, inputs and resources. Again, you'll see some words in those boxes that you don't need to use or that you can, but the first one saying partnerships, what kind of partnerships do you have, perhaps which ones do you need, thinking outside the box, maybe it's administration, maybe it's the school cafeteria staff or the maintenance staff, maybe it's a restaurant down the street, or a local health agency, or there's kind of the sky's the limit with the kind of support that you could need, but who's specific to need? If you have contributors, things like that, you can start filling in that box, that column there. I'll give you a minute or two to do that. So hopefully you started to get a little list of things down there in the inputs and the resources category. I'll go ahead and share a list of some of the things that I thought of, which I've mentioned some, but you're welcome to steal any of these for your list or figure out how they work with your project. But space, how much do you have of it to use? Is it a little? Is it a lot? Do you want to use the whole thing? But really just writing down, what do you have for space? You might, as far as space, want to think about accessibility. Is it easy to find? Is it hard to find? Can you get a truckload of soil to it if you wanted to? Things like that. Is it fenced in? Should it be fenced in? Things like fence might go on your list here of inputs if you have it or if you don't. Knowledge and skill I mentioned of people and parents and other people who are going to be involved. The relationships and the partnerships that you have. Volunteers that you already know you have involved or volunteers that you know you need. You'll start being able to create that list of needs, like I said, as you figure out who you already have. Is water on the site? Is that a resource? If it's not, you'll certainly want to put that on the needs list or figure out some rainwater collection or something. I mentioned exposure and money and time. Do you have permission? Is that a resource? Are you okay to go and do what you want, or do you have any limitations you need to follow? Do some soil tests, and I would encourage you to do soil tests with the youth if they're old enough. Certainly you can touch the soil, you can observe the soil, check out what it looks like, and then you can also send it away to get it tested a little more in detail. Do you have tools? Probably you do, and probably you have plants and seeds or at least a resource for them. So there's just a general list that kind of can help you guide some of what will fall into that inputs and resources category. Of course, this is not exhaustive whatsoever, and hopefully you'll continue to add on to it. So moving on here, the principle that I like to think about here with the inputs and the resources is observe and interact. And I feel like observing and interact, what that does is cultivate community and ownership. So the more we can interact with the people around us, what happens with a school garden is it really becomes less about gardening and a whole lot more about relationships and a whole lot more about the community that you're building within the school and maybe beyond the school. You engage faculty, students, parents, all sorts of staff within the school to be part of it. It's such a special thing. You have a diversity of skills from people really thinking outside the box, that skills that somebody says, you know, well, I know how to knit, that's all I know how to do. They can be a total resource for the garden project, and it's just up to you to figure out how. You know, how can their resource be of help to this project? It almost always can. Maybe you can do a fundraiser or something with knitting, or they can teach the kids how to knit, or you can make make fiber from local wool or something like that. How all people, ages, and abilities can participate, so important, creating those generational opportunities and opportunities for a diversity of people to be part of this project. Also, that observing and interacting, how are you recruiting volunteers and how are they supported? Is it simply that you're sending out emails and asking for people to help out? Because often you have to do a lot more than that. Being out there face-to-face, maybe it's flyering. It's going to be different in all of your situations, but certainly thinking about outside the box of how you get people involved. And really, what's the program's atmosphere like? How accessible is it? How easy is it to find? Accessible also to anybody who has any physical limitations or challenges. And when people do come, is it friendly? Is it fun? Is it overly stressful? How can you make it so that it's a nice, comfortable place? The photos down here at the bottom that are a little dark is from an activity that we hosted in one of the school systems around here. And we had a garden that we wanted to put compost on, and we thought we would have a few volunteers showed up, and what ended up happening was about 50 people showed up, so, which is great, of course, but be prepared for if you have people who show up, if you do recruiting well, and they show up, make sure they have some valuable work to do. So we ended up making an assembly line of buckets to get that compost from one place to another, and it worked out well because we didn't have too many wheelbarrows, and everybody got involved, and they started meeting other people, and it was really fun, and it worked out quite well, and we got the job done. So, but we had to kind of think quickly, how are we going to involve all these people in this one job to put compost onto the garden? So just a little example for you there. This icon here with observing and interacting, that is a tree. One of the reasons why this icon is used is thinking about that tree, of course, represents strength and also ability to respond to its environment. Trees are, of course, tall and strong and adapt to it being really warm in the middle of December or it being really cold, and they're pretty resilient to that. And that's something, by observing and interacting, we're able to do within our garden projects as well. By having community ownership in the garden project, we're able to do because we're more diverse. We're not dependent on one person. So moving on to activities, which is going to be the next column that we look at in our logic model, I encourage you to not get bogged down by the details at all. Activities is one of the logic model columns that often people find is easy to fill in because there's so many ideas of activities that people can come up with when you start to decide you want to have a garden. But there's that saying, you can't see the forest because of the trees, which kind of, we can get so involved in activities. Maybe it's activities that you're just sending emails to get people to know about the garden, and you realize, gosh, I haven't done any gardening. I haven't even been outside. That happens to a lot of us. You get caught up organizing, caught up in details, caught up in growing the biggest, best tomato plant, and then all of a sudden something, you know, they weren't being watered, and it was a drought, and none of the tomatoes grow. So really kind of paying attention. And you can also kind of think outside the box with this. If you don't have that much space for a garden, maybe gardening isn't the thing, and maybe something around nature awareness is the thing, and garden will come later. There's a little test that I often like to give in my in-person presentations. It's pop quiz. Some of you may have seen it before. But there's a lesson in so many things that for the students to learn, a lesson that can still meet many of the needs that you may have already listed, that can address nature awareness, that can address food security, can address physical activity just by using our outside world. And you don't even need a garden. And you look at an image like this, and perhaps you've heard of nature deficit disorder by that Richard Louv first said that our children are experiencing, and so are many adults. And most of us can easily name the brands that are listed, shown there on the left. And then a whole lot of people, especially students, young students, but adults as well, cannot name the tree species that are listed on the right. So you're welcome to take this little test for yourself if you'd like, or maybe test your classroom and see how it is. And if people don't know the trees on the right, they're probably somewhere outside, depending on where you live. But find some native species around you. Maybe you do it with birds. Maybe you do it with weeds. And make a lesson out of it. Make an activity out of it. And really try to think outside the box. It's not just all about gardens. You know, there's all sorts of natural environments, both in cities and in urban areas, that have plenty of things to learn, to offer us to learn really good life lessons. So some photos here of just a class going into the forest, learning about forest management and native tree species and habitats. The one on the right is a living sculpture made of willow plants, and then the one on the bottom, of course, is a mural that was drawn at a school garden. They did have a little garden just along that fence, but then they realized just as great of a project would be to draw and paint some of the plants that they would like to eventually have in the garden one day. So we'll go ahead and pause a little bit for you to think about some of those activities that you want to do with your garden project, or again, just with nature awareness in general. There's even some in that box that says field trips and events. You can certainly think about those things as well, and I'll just turn off my mic for a minute or two. So hopefully you have a little bit of a start there of some of the activities you hope to do with your garden. And perhaps you've already also realized that with the logic model, you can stick to the linear box format there. So perhaps the activity that you wrote in the top column matches the need. It addresses the need that you wrote in the first column. But I didn't mention it because you don't have to get that detailed at this point. Right now, it's a good brainstorm tool. So some of you might be organized enough that you're already doing that. But again, you don't have to. So moving on, the way you can kind of think about how to do some activities with the garden and kind of keep it simple, not get overwhelmed, is this principle that we call designing from pattern to detail. It's represented by a spider's web, as you can see there. And it's similar to realizing that every single garden project, every single garden you ever see is unique in its own, of course. It's an individual. But the pattern and the magic cultivated from each one is universal. And so with a spider's web, it's always made to its situation. The spider makes it based on how far it has to stretch the web from tree to tree or wherever it is. But it's always a pattern of radial rings, and that's the strength that provides that spider a home and is able to capture its prey. So there's always some similarity with it. So how that applies to the garden is just really remembering, again, not to get bogged down. You know, if the tomatoes aren't growing this season, let it go. Find something else to focus on, to put your energy to. If you don't have all the money that you wish you did to run this project, which most of us won't, it's okay. There's other things that you can still adapt to. So really thinking big picture, that big pattern thought that versus the detail specifics of it. A couple of just ideas of activities that you can include in your garden are things like eating salad there in the top left. Of course, salad's great. We have an activity on our website called Seed to Salad. It's a great one for during the school year. You can grow salad, in 8 to 10 weeks, depending on what you decide to grow. And it's a great, nice, raw meal, of course. Having some celebrations and events, pumpkin patches, pumpkin painting, things like that. The guy in the middle there is hunting Easter eggs in the cover crop that was on the farm at Common Good in D.C. We had a nice Easter party there. Those kids on the bottom left are holding worms. So again, even if you do have a garden or if you don't, think about other smaller things you can focus on besides the garden itself. Designing a garden, designing a planter box, letting the youth be involved with that. Taking a challenge, like an insect like that might eat your plants, and turn it into an opportunity to learn all about it. How many legs does it have? What color is it? Why is that color? Why is it that color? Have the students do some research and learn some things. And as you do all this, it's really important to communicate. Make sure you let people in your school know when you're there so that they do want to show up for these activities, and you're closed, it's not going to be good, or you're not going to be there. So always have a sign. Make sure you tell your story and let people know how to get in touch with you if they want to be involved or if they have questions. So before we get into our other columns here on the logic model, I just want to mention goals relating to the needs and the issues and the situation that you decided you're going to address with a garden. We have to think about what our goals are then. Once you have that, is your goal that you hope that you want to have a snack for all students, or that you actually want to feed the entire school? Your goal can be a whole number of things, but it's important to be realistic with the goals that you set so that you can actually meet them. And be specific. Be specific as you can. Funders and possible grant makers love logic models and love specific goals when you set them, but especially specific goals that are realistic. So there's an example down there. After a year of growing salad with 6th graders, more students will choose to eat the salad bar in the cafeteria. And you would be able to observe that in various ways, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So as we come into applying goals to our logic model, we're going to skip right over to outcomes. Outputs, of course, are important, but they're generally a little easier for people to think about, to kind of figure out and think about. So if we said in our activities we wanted to start a salad garden, our outputs might be that 30 children eat from that garden, but the outcome is kind of, well, why should we care? And it's sort of what you need to do to convince people that this is important. What are you going to do? What's the impact? So the outcome, or the outcomes here, they're short term is the first column, and then there's long term. And really important to try, if you can, to delineate that. And if you have been around for a really long time, if you have a garden that's been around for a long time, your short term and long term numbers are going to be a little different. But generally, I like to think short term is 1 to 3 years, long term is 3 and beyond. So I'll go ahead and give you a minute to jot some ideas down for the outcomes that you're hoping for with your garden project, and then I'll continue to move on. All right, so I know that wasn't enough time to get your outcomes down in short or long, but hopefully you got a couple. I just want to make sure we don't run out of time here. The last column that I have debated putting on this logic model is not here, as you can see. We've gone through all the columns. But it's really important to not forget about evaluation. If that means that you decide to make a new logic model for yourself and add evaluation or draw circles all around your logic model, then please do that, because it's so, so important to evaluate this entire thing. You could fill this all in and then you can start to run with it. If you don't ever pause and look back, then it's not really worth it. We can't shift so that we know that the work we're doing is as good as it can be. It's as impacting. So evaluation, keep good records so that you can inform yourself and inform others of what you're doing and be willing to modify. So I love this picture because if you can see it clearly, there's a tree that's fallen down or a stick on the road, and whoever painted the road decided they would just paint around it instead of moving that stick. So is that how we do it? Is we kind of just hit a bump and we go around, or can we actually shift? Can we evaluate how to do it differently? That's kind of the point here of what I'm trying to make. So the principle that relates to is looking for and accepting feedback. So we get feedback all the time, but what we do with that feedback, how we accept it and shift, is really what's important. welcoming negative and positive feedback. They are both extremely valuable. Being sure that you ask for it. Talk to people. Take surveys, specifically formal surveys or just informal. Hey, what do you think about the garden? Do you like it? What would you want to see different? And document, document, document as much as you can with photos. You can put down harvest quantity. You can be measuring things. It's a great math problem, of course, math work for kids to do. How many volunteers come? Who are they? Where do they come from? How do they find out about you? Document events. Be sure to publicize yourself and keep track of any public, press that you receive. That's always impressive and exciting. Make sure you just pay attention to things that work and things that don't work. If you work with kids that are old enough, I encourage you yourself as an organizer to keep a garden journal. Really document the weather, document the temperature of the day. When did the tomatoes come on this year? See how that compares to when they come on next year, things like that. So important to document and then try to evaluate and shift. And that's why this logic model is a living document. So it constantly is changing, especially from season to season. Most of us are maybe in a region where you do have a winter, and that winter is really just the opportunity to look at your feedback, evaluate, go back, what are you going to shift for next year? So we have to take that time, and a lot of us, it's very hard to take that time and do it, but so, so important. Will only make your program better and better. So to wrap up today, I'm just going to tell you about a few resources that are on our website and some of our collaborators' websites. This is the homepage at gardening.cornell.edu. You'll find downloadable classroom activities and lessons. There's a few there. There's one there in Spanish called Seed to Salad, and then the others are all in English. All sorts of things on art and where your food comes from, discovering your food systems, all sorts of great activities there. There's a list of some of them you can see. Also, then there's the how-to over to the right, gardening resources, just specific how-to that's run here by Cooperative Extension, which is part of what my program is part of. How to grow tomatoes, how to compost, how to cover crop, various things you might want to know specifically to gardening and landscaping. The bottom left, you can find program tools. That includes the research that I've talked about, some of it specific, some information on positive youth development that I've mentioned in more detail. You can find it there. Evaluation techniques. And you'll also be able to find the logic model that's downloadable for you if you want some others. There's a document called Sowing the Seeds of Success, also listed under Program Tools. That's a downloadable document that was written by a woman in our department and is very, very helpful. And we'll get into a lot of specifics that are easy for you to read about how to start and maintain a garden, which I felt like for this webinar today, I wanted to focus more on walking you through the logic model versus just essentially reading something that you can go read in a document like this. So I hope that that's okay for all of you. I'll also direct you to, hopefully you can see that, we offer 2 online courses, Teaching and Learning in the School Garden. There's a URL there. That is an online course. The next date is not yet established, but will happen sometime in 2013, where you can take part with people from around the world in this online class and get some Cornell credits. Also, starting in January is the first online permaculture design course, which will be being offered by First Time Cornell is offering anything like that. You can check out some information at that link as well. Some of our other favorite resources on starting and sustaining or creating a thriving garden are listed there. The California School Garden Network and Life Lab are 2 of our favorites. So just to wrap up, remember that you can start small. Try to create a network so that you're not doing it by yourself. Make sure you establish goals and an identity for yourself. Evaluate and adapt. And I haven't given you too much time for questions, but thank you so much for your attention, and feel free to ask questions now or get in touch with me any other way via phone or email. Thanks so much.
Liz, we have one question for you, and that is, how do you engage administrators that aren't on board or have other agendas?
Sure, great question, good question, and common question. Some of it is really figuring out the kind of story that you need to tell. They might not be interested or have other things to pay attention to, and they don't want to hear about a garden. So what other ways can you sell it? And that kind of relates back to the need column that maybe you started writing about in your logic model. If you can sell it as a place that's going to provide address food security, is that something that they're going to be more interested in? If they're interested in raising test scores, then try to really sell it in a way, writing the letter to them or speaking to them and giving them information about the things that they're going to really want to care about. So providing information about how test scores have increased because of gardens, and just really thinking about the kind of what is going to be their catch. Just like the students aren't going to be interested in gardening, and you will have the challenge to figure out what is their catch. Maybe it's art for a student, maybe it's insects for a specific student. Same as the administration. We have to figure out how to convince them so that they realize it's important. And then the end goal is that garden. It might not be what you first present. Instead, you present something to them like, hey, how about we find a way to improve what our kids eat and reduce obesity and improve test scores at our school. They're not going to say they don't want to do that. They're going to certainly want to do that. So just flipping it a little would be my suggestion.
We have another question that just came in from Twitter from Vanessa Cochran, who asks, how are school gardens sustained through the summer when kids aren't in school?
Another great question, often one of the biggest challenges. I've seen many different things happen. I've seen a school that was able to get a grant to actually employ some of the students. This was at a nearby middle school, so students that are of age that would be employed in a summer program and would have about 5 hours a week of time that they could be at the garden to maintain it. And they would harvest the produce that was coming out and bring it to the soup kitchen nearby. So one awesome example, of course, that took time to develop. Volunteers is a lot of it, parent or community volunteers that are willing to sign on for some summer work. Having somebody continue to organize and run the show is important. And then otherwise, I do see a lot of schools kind of put it to bed for the summer and think about like growing salad during the school year, growing things like if you plant potatoes or garlic, you will have a harvest once school starts again after the summer. So if you don't have, or until you have the volunteer base or ways to employ students or get students to do the work during the summer and help out, sometimes you just have to adapt and not grow as much during the summer. Another thing that's great to incorporate are things like berries and perennials and fruit trees, and there's a lot of early and late season varieties of those, and those you might be able to then harvest things before school year ends or after summer's over.
Linda in Maryland asks, what are some common problems, challenges that you face in getting these gardens underway? What can I expect to go wrong?
What can you expect to go wrong? It depends. It's going to depend, of course, on your situation and how much buy-in you have from your school community. The more buy-in you have from that entire, there's a list in the Sowing Seeds of Success document that says all the possible people that you can connect with, from cafeteria staff to maintenance staff, to, of course, administration, to other teachers, after-school teachers. The more you can connect and make it that doing with experience, then the less challenge as far as people not wanting it or being scared of it you'll be able to be quite successful in that regard, which is often a challenge, is that people just feel like half the time they feel like they don't know what's going on and why all of a sudden there's some raised beds or there's some compost on the ground outside. So really informing them is key, and making sure you let everybody in the school know what's going on if it's already a go, or how they can get involved. Providing them photos and documentation and stories from successful ones all around the country, which are, of course, thousands of them. some of those you can find on some of the websites that I already mentioned, and showing that this works in various ways, trying to find a school community that's similar to yours and showing how magical that garden was for that school. Some other challenges, of course, are thinking small and not getting overwhelmed by all of the possible options. Maybe if you haven't started yet, you might not be like, oh gosh, I'm not thinking big at all, I just don't even know where to start. But once you start, you get quite excited, and it's easy to start being like, wait, we can get more space, we can plant more, we can grow more, we can do more. And so really just taking it slow, being really good at the few things that you have happening in the garden and not trying to do too much is going to be really important, and will keep you really grounded and able to thrive with the project.
Our next question is it easier to start school garden programs in elementary schools or high schools?
From my experience, I can't say that one is easier than the other. I think that they both have similar challenges. To relate to the previous question and to this one as well, I think as you think about connecting the school garden, convincing teachers who are, of course, very busy and have a lot of standards to follow, whatever age group you're working with, whether it's middle or high school, having that garden and the activities that are happening in that garden relate to the things that have to happen anyway in a classroom. You can learn science, you can learn biology, you can learn language and arts and math. You can learn all those things through a garden project. And there's a lot of curriculum. You don't need to reinvent the wheel to be able to do that. There's so much curriculum available for you online at our website and so many others, so that you can be using curriculum that specifically relates to the standards that the teachers already have to follow. So in that regard, I don't see a difference in age. I see just different opportunities. You'll involve the high schoolers perhaps a little differently than you may be with maybe a job training program or something like that would be more exciting for high schoolers, and something different with middle schoolers, but generally pretty similar.
Thank you. And thank you to Liz and to everyone who participated in the 5th and final session of the People's Garden Fall Webinar Series. This session will be posted online for anytime viewing after closed captioning is complete. If you have questions about this series, you can email peoplesgarden@usda.gov.